back in here when you're taking notes or when you're pulling your speech together, things like that. Is that kind of a good place to start for you guys? Feel like? Okay. So however you want to start, it doesn't.
I'll go last because I have a lot of thoughts.
So do we need a timer on this?
So kind of to that point, it seems like in the evaluation there are so many things you can potentially talk about, and you see the helper forms that they can give you, and they talk about all these different mechanics, pacing, volumes, and then you're basically just looking at just the raw execution of it. But I kind of think of it as a little bit like still evaluating it as a performance in some way or another. Because if you think about it as a script, if you have an actor and you have multiple people reading the script, you'll get very, very different versions of the speech. And while the content is the same, the delivery is very different. So trying to figure out, if you look at it like that's more of a performance, how do they do? And thinking again in terms of what are the differentiators? What are the few things that I want to center on and talk about, not the everything? Because I think where it gets really muddled is you're like, well, here's my 100-point inspection of your speech, and here's all the little things that I thought about in the 100 different things. When you really, much like a speech, need to leave a few impressions and a few thoughts on the audience and on the speaker. So just narrowing it down and trying to find what is the differentiator and something that's also unique, because the evaluation itself is a performance, and how do you make that sort of punch and stick? And so I think it's just that it can start really wide in a cloud of things, and I start kind of collecting notes as a cloud, but then I try to center down on a few key differentiators or a few points that would punch.
So one of the things that we didn't do here, just because Caroline's a more advanced speaker, is a lot of times we'll have the manual, right, where we kind of have to hit some of those points that because they're doing a manual speech. Do you try to pull those into your evaluation then as well? I mean, are those some of your key points that you choose, or do you still just kind of do your own? Go ahead, just
okay.
finish,
Yeah, sure.
finish up, and then we'll.
I don't completely neglect the goals of the speech. I try to focus on that because I feel like we have to, even though I might want to just talk about the content. And sometimes the content to me is what's most important. Unless the delivery is distracting, in which case the delivery needs to be addressed as well. But if it's a manual speech and the speaker has given you clear goals of what they want you to look for, which honestly I neglected today because Caroline, you told us to look at closing, audience engagement, and humor, and I don't know if I spoke to any of those points. So did my own
you
thing
spoke
today.
To closing.
Yeah, and so if it is a manual speech, and you have to take the context of where they're at and what they're trying to achieve, because sometimes these things are studies. They're not meant to be their manifesto of their perfect speech. They're doing a study of a particular type or angle of the speech, so you have to look at it from that perspective. So yeah, I think knowing the goal of the speech and what project it is important, speaking to that specifically.
Julie, can we have a quick point of order? The rest of the room didn't get to tell us what they were here for, and it may help panelists to hear that.
Yeah, that's a great
Jesse butted in on us.
Good job, John. So while you guys were outside, we just kind of went around and just said, why are we here? What are we wanting to get out of this? And I did share the questions that people had written so that they kind of knew that as well. So yeah, let's go ahead. And were you complete as far as, okay. Do you want to, go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, I actually love evaluations. I know, right? I do. I love them because they make me challenge myself in giving that delivery. I like getting good feedback, but I also really enjoy hearing the evaluations that people give to other speakers, because that a lot of times is what I soak in to make my speeches better. And so the more I hear other people evaluate it, I think the better it makes me as a speaker, because I've taken so many tips from hearing speeches, evaluations of other speakers.
Dave?
For me, it's really to learn how to structure it. So what you're speaking to actually gave me tons of ideas when I saw my evaluate. There's also just trying to figure out how to pull out the different pieces. There were so many things in Caroline's speech that I love, but I would have never thought to speak towards that during an evaluation. So that's kind of
Is it Laura?
I'm Katie.
Katie, so close. She's off by every letter. I nailed it.
No. I think for me, evaluations are challenging, and learning how to structure them is one thing, but also not being always positive. I think a lot of people in our group, and Amy can attest to this, that we just give positive feedback, and I want the criticism. That's kind of why I'm in Toastmasters, is to improve upon myself. So while I don't want, you don't want to be mean, you do want to learn how to give constructive criticism.
Yeah, kind of like what Jeremy was saying as well. So, Amy.
I like evaluations, and I also want to be a better evaluator. I do always 100% try to find one thing in a speech that they need to work on, no matter how polished or professional it is. And sometimes it's super hard to figure out. You can't figure out what to pull out, what they should improve upon. And I would like to personally figure out, like, how do you put it all together. And I know myself personally, like Katie said, I get a lot of too positive, warm fuzzies, and I'm like, thanks. I know it wasn't perfect. So, how do you convey that to somebody?
Hi, I'm Mike Macris. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
No.
I was going to say Jim. I was
I just figured I'd help out with the crutch there. I guess I always find, having, I think, seen some evaluations that I really enjoyed and really heard things that, wow, I know I've got so many great ideas on how I can take my next speech to that next level. And I've received evaluations like that, then I've received other evaluations where it's like it said, very positive, and it's like, okay, thanks for the pat on the back, but I want to get to that next level. I want to keep pushing myself forward. So I always see that the best evaluators somehow get you to that point where they challenge you and push you along. And I think I want to make sure I become that evaluator that could really challenge and push people forward.
Good morning, Mark Maish. I came today to see if I could learn something, but I have a learning disability. I just tend to, scramble trying to get prepared to give an evaluation. It's the hardest thing I do. Looking at the speech today, when I take her message that she was trying to articulate, I took that into my experiences, and it's exactly what's going on in this realm. It's comparing to Brad or to John, and it's really that's probably the biggest stumbling block I got. And so when Greg says performance, I can do that. Now whether it's going to be effective or not, I don't know. It's a hit and miss deal. But I also know the lasting effect of an evaluation. Just recently, and I don't know how to do LinkedIn, but I'm kind of on it, and I see people come through. I don't know how to communicate on it. But a lady, and some of you may remember from a long time ago, Kyle Arrington. Anybody? Brad, do you remember her? Wasn't in the club very long, but I gave an evaluation on her icebreaker. And when my name came up, she said, I just never will forget that evaluation.
Oh, wow.
And I had to go back and remember what it was, and I remember it. It was like, you're a new member. Okay, everybody, we're going to take a vote on whether we're going to keep you here or not. And she was, like that. And then I go, all right, somebody get up and pound boards across the door, because she is not getting away. And it just was the way I felt, the way I perceived her and stuff. And that one worked, but it wasn't too much substance. Really not. It was just hey, I'm glad you're here, and you stood up and did the deal. So it's all these circumstances that we work with. So.
How do you follow that? I always try to be better. Sometimes I flop horribly, but I always want to get information and try and integrate it in my speech. I pick up nuggets from what people say over time. There'll just be things that I will not forget. one time Greg said something to the effect of, I think the worst speech you could ever listen to, or the worst experience, would be one that is indifferent. And I know I have butchered this all sorts of ways, but the essence of it was if you listen to something or do something and it has no impact on you, good, bad, different, like nothing, you walk away from there and there's nothing you take out of it, then that is time you'll never get back. And so every time I try and make sure that I try and find that distinction, that thing that actually impacts me, that thing that I will take away and hold on to. And I try and do that with, I remember from, even maybe subconsciously, my first evaluation was by Mark Mage. And the things that he said then that still resonate with me today. This speech was evaluated by Jesse the first time. And the things that Jesse said that I had to go back and internalize and actually pay attention to. And I ended up changing the story based on feedback that Jesse gave. So for me, it's just being able to pick something from someone, from everyone, something that I can take with me every single time.
I remember as a new Toastmaster, working on my first 10 speeches and being a newer member of the club, and being ever more frightened about giving an evaluation than giving a speech, and because there's no way to prepare for it. And as an evaluator, you are trying to obey two masters. One is you're trying to do the best job giving a constructive criticism to somebody, but at the same time you're trying to give an impromptu speech that you're going to be compared to with the other evaluators and voted on. So consequently, you're really working on two diametrically different things, and it's unfortunate, but that's the way evaluations work. And it puts a lot of stress on the evaluator trying to give a good speech, but at the same time try to walk away with something that was of value to the speaker. And that's always a challenge, especially in trying to be sensitive to the needs of the speaker. If you've got somebody that comes to Toastmasters because they're scared to death and their boss said, if you're ever going to get anywhere, you better learn to speak. Right. And then you come in here and you riddle them with a tough evaluation. That's not going to help. And at the same time, you don't want to give us an evaluation that means nothing. And so I think that empathy is a very key part of the whole thing too. It's a challenge. I love it. It's a challenge, but it's not easy to do it right.
There you go. More food for thought.
A lot of food for that.
Yes. She wanted to go last.
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate the feedback and the questions and why we're here. I totally agree with what Greg said. Trying to take a list of things that are either positive or negative or both and narrow them down, because we are always trying to encourage each other to grow. Well, how do we get that point across in 2 to 3 minutes? That's a really tough thing to do, to Brad's point, that you have to make it meaningful for the speaker, whether it's an icebreaker or their speech number 10, or you're trying to evaluate John or Brad or Mark who've been here for 20 years, and there's such professionals at how they do that. It's really tough to adjust what you're trying to accomplish. I know when I'm trying to give an evaluation, I try to make it meaningful for that person, but I also look back, and part of my process is recalling the evaluations that I've received, like Janelle, over the course of time, and what's made me a better person. And I try to throw in one of those nuggets. I may not remember who it came from or where it came from, but I also want, and this is it's a good thing, but it's a struggle, because I want the evaluation to be good for the speaker, but I also want to give something of importance to the group as well, because that's how I've learned over the years. And I have all my notes from the beginning of time, and I can go back and go through them and and say, gosh, what a great thing for someone to say so many years ago. And we need to repeat that, or we need to put that back in. I need to think about that the next time I give a speech. And when you throw all that out there, that's great, but now I've got 2 minutes to put that all
Give us
together.
an example of what, for Caroline's speech today, like what did you, like, were there things you thought about before? Like I kind of want to, I know Caroline's good at this, I want to put this in, like thinking about who you're evaluating. Are there things that you had on your notes that you kind of like, oh, never mind, I'm not going to talk about that, I don't have time. So can you give me the specifics today? about
Yes.
what you did?
So she wanted us to look at audience engagement, sense of humor, better delivery, storytelling, transitions, and a strong closing. And that's really what we all want from a speech that we give, and we want to continually improve on those. The hard part with someone as talented as Caroline is that you do have to move on pretty quickly. We know she's got storytelling chops. We know she has good things to say. The important part is to kind of keep rewarding that behavior, her relaxed tone. So I try to look at her strengths and remind her, you do that so well, thank you for bringing it. So I try to remind her of her strengths, and that's when I talked about her relaxed, thoughtful tone and her pauses. Everything was so thoughtful. This wasn't intended to be a humorous speech or an entertaining speech, is more to be thoughtful. I think the one thing that I didn't go on, and I wrote that down and it meant a lot to me, was the message of being yourself. And I really think that when a person like Caroline gives a speech that has good messages in it, I want to reinforce that, because I don't want anybody to walk away forgetting the little things that she said. Let's think about this. Think of the magnitude. Be yourself. And I look as my job as an evaluator to reinforce the good things that she came out with, but also I think just the one tiny thing I suggested was just tying it back in for your storytelling, and that was one of the things you wanted, was a strong closing. I felt it was strong, but if you really want to punch us and make us walk out of here with a wow, just tying it one more time back in. But it's hard to go through the process quickly, and you look at your notes and go, okay, I'll talk about this and try to reinforce this. But it's hard, and I look at things, try to do kind of the Oreo sandwich thing. You know, good things, have a couple of things to work on, and then something that we can all work on, and then wrap it back up with something good. So that's how I go through what she wants, I go through the positives and negatives, and then try to dive into 1 or 2 points, just basically due to time.
So I want to hear Jesse's thoughts too, but as we're kind of doing that, I think one of the biggest things, that question that's come up, is how to give the criticism part. And you may address this in your...
Why me?
Well, I just, because you do it better than anybody. But I think that if you guys have things to add, or if we have, I mean, all of us have strong points with evaluation, if there's a way to, we can interject on that as well. But I think that's one thing I want to make sure we get in, is how to give that kind of critical feedback, because I think that was a question that most of us had on doing that. So, floor is yours, Jesse.
So I get this reputation as being a harsh evaluator 4 or 5 years ago. It's like I replaced Delaney, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Now, you did reinforce that with your Toastmaster tip just about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, so if you actually, nobody's been in this group for more than a meeting knows that I'm very passionate about evaluations, and it's like my purpose of still being in this club is to continue to help grow people into giving good evaluations, because what our guests reiterated is, while positive feedback is incredibly important, the objective of being in Toastmasters is we are wanting to grow and become better public speakers. And so I always feel that the evaluation piece of what we do is really the opportunity to deliver back on our overarching objective of being in the club for each other. So if I'm a speaker, my speech is the most important part of growing that objective. But if I'm an evaluator, me getting better as a speaker is important in that, but it's more important I believe, to give that feedback to who is just speaking to help them continue on their growth and their objectives. One of the things that I'm going to address the constructive feedback, but one of the things that I do that I don't know how much this happens out for others is I always talk to the speaker ahead of their speech, not the morning of, but 2 days prior. And I just make it a priority in my schedule that week. If I'm an evaluator on Friday, I want to reach out to the speaker by Wednesday, and I want to connect with them over the phone and not just through email. The reason that I do that is, well, first of all, I kind of want to give myself a heads up. So we've said you can't prepare for an evaluation, but you actually can in a way. You can come into this room knowing a good amount about the person that you're getting ready to evaluate. I may not know their speech. Oftentimes I don't want to know their speech, or I don't want to know a lot of the content because I don't want to already start creating an evaluation before I've heard the speech. But the reason I reach out ahead of time is I want to start building a rapport with Caroline. So I did reach out to Caroline this week on this speech because Caroline was great and sent us her talking points ahead of time. And she and I spoke a month or so back when she gave this speech. And I speak to Caroline often. So Caroline and I have built a good relationship. We've built a good rapport. Part of that's because I've been in this club for 9 years. So I have that leg up. But I do that with our newer members. I call them and I want to, and usually what I ask them is, why did you join Toastmasters? And what is your objective for your speech you're giving on Friday? The other thing by doing that, by insisting on speaking to the person ahead of time, is they then don't have the opportunity to procrastinate as much. So if our objective of being in the club is to help each other become better speakers, we all know that there are the speeches that get written the night before and they don't get practiced as much. Well, if a speaker knows that their evaluator is going to be speaking to them on Thursday, they better have something to talk about. And I've talked to people before and they go, I have no idea what I'm going to speak about. I'm like, okay, that's what we're going to spend the next, and I spend 15, 20 minutes on the phone. This is what we're going to talk about. I've been accused and guilty of rewriting people's speeches that night before. I try not to do that. I try to, if I feel like there's a way to contribute to the speech, I do try to offer that. I gave Caroline the quote of "Comparison is the thief of all joy" because we were talking about something completely different. And I said, I just heard this quote and I just feel like it's a quote you would like. I mean, just knowing you. And so I'm not taking credit for that. But it was a way to, it's a way to help contribute to the success of each other growing as speakers. And I just don't think we can do that enough. So I see the meetings trying to happen 5 minutes before the meeting starts. Tell me what to look for in my evaluation. Tell me what to look for. John, we'll get to your questions. Write it down. We'll get to it. I think that rapport building is really important. Because of that rapport building, then I can come into this room as an evaluator with 2 to 3 minutes and really focus on what needs to improve with this speaker or the speech. Caroline knows how deeply I care for her and how much I want her to grow as a speaker. So if my evaluation then comes off of, God, you just gave all constructive and you didn't get a lot of positive feedback, what's missed is what's happening before the speech and the conversation, and then I almost always pull the speaker aside afterwards, and that's when I give a lot of that positive feedback to them directly. So I'm probably missing that opportunity in front of the group to give that positive feedback. But the reality is I have 2 to 3 minutes, and I completely agree with Kim. I'm always trying to look for giving something back to the total audience, including the speaker. So I tried to do that today by giving a tip about how do you tell stories in the context of a speech. I think for me, on the constructive feedback specifically, so to get away from appearing harsh, because my first evaluation that I ever witnessed in this club was incredibly harsh. And it was delivered by somebody that was not a very good speaker. And I thought, you really don't have the credibility to be standing up here giving such a harsh speech because you're fumbling all over your evaluation. So it just really stuck with me, and I thought, gosh, okay, this is what I'm signing up for. I can handle this. But it was all negative. It was all constructive, but not, or it was all negative and critical, but it wasn't constructive. And that's the difference. Critical and constructive are 2 different things. So if I'm going to give you something that is pure and critical, it better be constructive. You better be able to walk away with it and be able to do something with it. So for me, that's going one layer deeper, and I've given this in a tip before. I think, especially for an advanced speaker, one of the easy things we could have picked up on Caroline's speech today is that she messed up her opening quote, and she had to restate it. Now, you did it flawlessly, and that's going to happen. You're going to mess up something, you paused, you gathered yourself, and then you gave it again. But that's easy prey in an evaluation, right? And that's just what good is that gonna, you know you messed it up. I had to give an evaluation of Carrie's speech in this club and he bombed. I mean, he like basically just should have fell down on the ground and took a nap because it was just like, he knew he bombed. And so what, as an evaluator, what can I stand up here and do instead of saying, yeah, you really messed it up? We all know that. We're all in the room. So that's for me where I go one layer deeper. What's really going on here? What can I really provide that constructive feedback on? So I'll stop there because I have a lot I can.
Before John talks.
Wait. Jesse, were you satisfied with your conclusion of your evaluation today? And this is for all three of you. Were you satisfied with your conclusion? Because you gave a recent tip about.
You're talking about the close?
Her conclusion.
Don't
But she said
remember.
amazing speech.
Don't remember what I said. So, so the better question is.
Today's
Yeah, no, I don't
evaluation.
even remember how I concluded it. This is the problem when you give an evaluation. You don't actually remember
You
what
don't
you
remember
said.
the stuff you said.
Well, that's part of my point.
So was I happy with my evaluation today? No. I got really tripped up in this evaluation today because I knew it was a teaching moment. So I tried to cram too much into my evaluation. It really just messed with me today. I was trying to construct, how do you construct an evaluation, and then how do you actually go and give an evaluation? I gave a tip recently about not ending your speech with the phrase, but great job.
Right.
My point in that tip, and I know it's stuck with everyone, and Greg said amazing job, which I thought was great. And my point is that saying but great job is not a bad thing to say, but it's an empty thing to say. And yes, did I do that at the end of my speech? I did. So I failed on coming up with, because what I always try to end my speech with is, what is the thing I'm going to walk away with the most? The thing that I remembered the most from Caroline's speech today is the importance of storytelling and thinking about how you tell stories in the context of a cocktail party versus in the context of a speech. So I tried to reiterate that. But it is awkward, right? We all can agree. How do you end an evaluation? What I try to do is, instead of saying, but great job, I just try to say thank you. Because I am truly thankful for the words that people give in this club. So that's why I gave, and I usually give Toastmasters tips on something that I need to learn.
Could the other panelists also answer my question?
Closing?
Your closing today, your conclusion of your evaluation conclusion.
So
It was funny.
Yeah. So there's some people, and it was accidental in terms of that, but some people are really good at playing off of the history of the club and kind of saying things that are funny and humorous to people that kind of know what's going on and everything. And just to kind of challenge the notion of the great job kind of conclusion, is one of the things that I thought about it is that it seems like it might be like a handshake. It's ceremonial. It just ends it, and then you walk away. But I take your point in that it's vacuous of really any meaning. But for two words that signal the end of I'm walking off stage, whether it's thank you, whether it's great job, whether it's whatever, it's a ceremonial exit. So I still see it as somewhat acceptable. You're going to put something at the end there that's meaningless. You're not going to be able to fit a good last statement in other than a clean, a graceful exit. So I think like something goes there, but the point was taken and the point was really important and made, and it did make a significant impact on that meeting and on all future meetings.
That's not my intention.
Yeah, no, but it was awesome in that way.
I thank you to our guests. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to get back to Laura's point on structure, because if you analyze all three of these evaluations and you look at the opening, body, and close of all three, they all started, every one of them, if you watch the video, they all started by describing the speech. And they all said, okay, this is what you did and this is what I liked. And so it was, as Kim mentioned, it was a constructive sandwich where you said something that you liked, you gave it constructive criticism, and then you send them off saying great job. But I think, so there is structure there, and you really can focus on what you liked by describing the speech. Where you can get stuck is spending too much time describing the speech, and I've seen that happen where a new evaluator spends the whole time recapping the speech, and you didn't say anything except, we got the cliff notes of the speech again. So you got to be careful to jump off of that and go into the constructive part. And Kim used the exact words, the one thing that I would offer. That was a pretty soft way of getting into the part that she's going to say, this is what I think that you could improve on. And I thought that was great. The one thing that I would offer. And she actually offered more than one, but the one thing that she started with. And you can only say one thing at a time. And that was good. I did notice, though, in all three evaluations, and we are talking about the experts here, that they were narrow in the number of evaluations, the number of constructive criticisms they gave. And that's probably something that I do because I go wide instead of deep on my evaluations all too many times. And I want to give that the 10-point checklist of here's what you did wrong, here's what you can improve on, and da-da-da-da-da. And it's easy to do, especially with a new speaker because you're a new speaker. And as opposed to targeting one or two things and then going back to the constructive part again, or to the complimentary part again.
I would like the group to evaluate me, and because I'm here to learn as well, and I didn't get to hear the others and have the benefit of that. So I would like to hear critique on what I could do better. If someone would evaluate me, or if we want to keep talking and maybe have 5 minutes at the end to do that. I think that, I know that would be
I actually
helpful
wrote
to
an
me.
evaluation for your
You did? Oh, good. I would welcome that because I've been sitting in the president's seat for a couple years and I totally suck at this again.
That's what we should have done. We should have had people evaluate us as evaluators.
And I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
Evaluate the evaluators.
Bring it.
There we go. That could be part two, evaluating the evaluators.
I thought it was interesting that
'Cause I heard-
everybody had a different constructive criticism. Everybody had something different that they would recommend, and it was all valid.
So
I
just to
thought.
recap for Kim, because she's the only one that didn't get to hear your other two evaluations. So Greg, your criticism or your feedback as far as improvement was?
To reinvigorate.
One was to like, I felt that kind of towards the middle to end, the point had been made, and it sort of lost a little bit of steam. So to just add something at the end, maybe one other story, and possibly a story of where you were completely joyful or happy, and where you were not caught up in comparison. Just to end on a strong point, a strong note, and give the latter half of the speech something else. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you both, Kim and you both had mentioned closing, right? Didn't they both give you that feedback about closing? I don't know that Jesse did, but
No,
I think
Jesse
both of
did
them.
not.
And that was one of the things that I kind of came up with. I wanted you to come back around to the point of your beginning part. Is, and what was your feedback as far as for improvement, Jesse?
I focused on the aspect of storytelling because forgive me if this is wrong, but I believe you're working on storytelling. I think that was one of the objectives we talked about prior.
Yes.
So I focused on the story around the race and talking about giving a story in the context of a speech versus a cocktail party. And when you give it in the context of a speech, it's really more about intent, whereas the cocktail party is really more about entertainment. So the part about your husband got for me into the part of entertaining and not the part of intent. I think there was an intent at the beginning, and then for me it was like, okay, I mean, I think I love hearing stories about you and Rick because I think that you guys are this just really interesting couple together because I know you guys have a lot of differences. So part of me was like, I love hearing stories about Rick. And then part of me was like, wait, why are we here?
However, when you wrote out what you wanted to focus on in your speech, you wrote build up to humor and punchline. So I don't know, was that for humor for your, were you trying to add humor to the speech? Because to me it was it was less of a humorous speech and more of an impactful speech. So what were you trying to add as far as the humor? I mean, when you wrote that?
So the truth about this speech is that I changed it up so many times up to when I walked up there. Every time I gave it in my head, I had a different context to it. And where I was landing with it was not funny. And in my head, I don't know how to do not funny. I
You did it.
always want to gravitate towards humor, towards. I love when people laugh. I love when I look around the room and everyone's teeth are out. It does something for me. So I always will gravitate to the funny, the humorous. And every time I gave this speech, I first listened to the speech that I gave that Jesse evaluated, and I was like, it was okay. And I was listening more for the reactions rather than to my speech. And I was like, it was okay. I didn't really have any solid punchlines. And for a second there, I wanted to go back to the I liked story, the one on the Facebook where I had this imaginary friend, and I told myself, no, that's an easy story. That's an easy story that you can make funny, that you can make work regardless. So I kept changing this story, this speech up to try and cultivate humor. And then I realized I was so focused on the humor that I was getting lost. I was losing the context and the value of the message that I was trying to deliver. And so finally I just landed on, I will go with this, and this is what I'll build on.
So I think if I would have read that, I would have thought, now, humor does, I mean, I think it didn't fit for the most part, but I think you could have some in there, and you had it, and it seemed to flow to me. I thought the humor, didn't seem like you were trying
The
to
humor about
squeeze it.
the shirt saying that it was American.
Yeah, I mean, and I said humor was overrated in my evaluation, and I didn't make a big enough point there because I didn't have enough time. But I think because you're speaking about humanity, there's an element of humor that comes along with humanity. Because we're funny individuals, not funny ha-ha, like the way we compare ourselves to each other and the conversations we have in our head. Anybody looks into that. Like I look into it, if you're gonna be like, Caroline, what are you doing? Like you're amazing, like quit it, you know what I mean? And there's a humor element to that. So I think the humor, trying to put it in there, potentially distracted you. Because you just said, I don't know how to give a speech that doesn't have humor. You did it today. It has humor because
You do it pretty naturally.
You do it so naturally. Your voice inflection leads itself to sarcasm, which in a way is humor. And you don't have to stand up here and give your mama jokes.
And
You had to do that.
You don't have to do that, and you're still amazing.
to build on that point, and the point of your speech was to be yourself.
Right.
You, Caroline, don't have to be loud and don't have to be this bucket list. You just be your list. And that's how it's funny, because it's you. And if you remain, and I think that's the biggest message that I get from you and other speakers, if you remain authentic to yourself, it's gonna come off the way you want it to. Because I loved what you just said. You'd love to look around the room and see the teeth out. And that's funny. I mean, who would have thought, see your teeth out? What does that mean? But the way you said it just makes me giggle, because that's how you are and that's how you say things. So when you come up to deliver speech, whether it's humorous or not, you're injecting yourself, which is the only way to do it, and it will come off funny when it's supposed to, and it will be real serious when it needs to be. Don't get hung up on putting a label on it, because it's not going to be the funny that you see other people doing. It's going to be the funny the way all of us see you.
So a couple points here, just the way, and then I want to go around, is that kind of what we're doing here is like a master's meeting. So if any of you are wanting to, most of you already know this, but give a speech, then you're wanting more critique than just the 2 to 3 minutes. This is kind of how it is. Like you get more feedback and you can get so much more. So if you're ever wanting to give a speech, this is a great forum to do that, because there's so many good suggestions. But I'd like to go around, see what you have questions, and then I'd kind of like one takeaway as well. So, sorry, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was gonna, we can come back.
Go ahead, Mike.
I just have a question, again, not having any evaluator yet. And based on our conversation with Caroline here, would you have gone back in your evaluations and focused on the humor part of that, and give her more feedback on the humor part, like you just did? that you don't need to add the jokes, you know, you gave the humor. And maybe you didn't know ahead of time that you struggled with putting humor in. But, you know, again, as an evaluator and knowing I'm working on this, and I get different, you know, what's the overall story? But also about, you know, and I'm looking at it from myself as a speaker and wanting that feedback. I don't want, you know, I do want to know that I did okay, but what can I do better? And I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around when you talk, when you make that connection and say, you know, humor is a big point of kind of focus on. Do you give that more weight, I guess, in your evaluation? And having had this panel discussion, would you have changed your evaluation back to Carolyn, knowing that?
I think it's kind of like what Kim said, is that you have so much and you have to kind of pick one or two things that you're, so if that's one thing that struck you as important for her or for the club, then I would, that's mine.
And to reiterate what Jesse said, and I love this idea, and I'm going to start doing it when I get back into evaluations, is calling the speaker a couple days ahead, because I didn't know until now that that was something Caroline really wanted to be, because I thought she's always been funny. She's quirky, she's funny, she delivers well. And that never was on my radar until just a few minutes ago. And to your point, would I go back and change it? Probably not my evaluation. However, if I had done what Jesse had done and spent time with her on the phone on Wednesday before the speech, I would have picked that up. And through the conversation, know that that's the real important thing. And I think what Jesse's offered us today is really golden as far as get to know what they really want. Not just, because all of us get in a hurry and it's like, oh, what do I want them to evaluate? Pauses, ahs, closing. That's like saying great job at the end. It's kind of empty. So let me have a conversation with her and find out, gosh, humor really is important to her. And maybe I can ease some of her fears by saying, are you kidding? You're so funny anyway. Just be yourself. And what else do you got? What else do you want me to cover? So
I think one of the things that I also appreciate about the call, and that's one of the things I'm definitely writing
Yeah,
down
me-
today,
yeah.
is that for those of us who do have trouble giving constructive feedback, that automatically gives us the permission. You have asked me to look for this.
Yeah.
And this is my feedback to you on this. And I think that just makes it easier. Like if you have a difficult time giving constructive feedback, they've already said, please give this to me. And certainly there are times to look for other things or comment on other things, but for those getting into evaluations,
We've talked about.
you all, I think most of you, if not all of you, did it, so I appreciate it.
No, and I thank you for making that point, because I do think what happens a lot of times in the context of evaluation is we're nice to each other because we're trying to build rapport and ask permission to then say something that maybe is not so nice to hear.
Right.
So that's where the great job comes from. That's where all of this niceness comes from, which I don't discount. I just do it behind the scenes. And then when you guys get me, you're like, oh.
We've talked about how to prep.
I've learned, I've grown. Yeah. I also evaluated Shannon's first speech in this club, and she'd asked me to look for things constructive, but I got in this room and saw her give that speech, and I thought, there's no room for giving anything constructive today because she needs a cheerleader.
Yes.
She needs to come back up here and do it again.
Exactly.
So I can do it if I
Good
have to. I've learned a lot from Mark Nation and how to evaluate our speakers.
But now knowing what a person needs.
She needs to be brought
it's
into
like
the
very much like a
group.
right evaluation time
Yeah.
kind of thing, and
Yeah.
and having that kind of at least self-awareness to make that call is pretty
Yeah.
important.
That relationship building
Yep.
can't.
She needed to just simply be brought into the group.
Yep.
First things first.
I thought about how would Mark Maish evaluate the speech. I really did think that, and it's not by accident you evaluated a lot of icebreakers when I was president, because I think you're really good at it. So it's like, oh, we have an icebreaker, Mark's evaluating them.
Yeah.
I think, you know, we've talked a lot about how to prep ahead of time, and I think Jesse's point is well taken, but we have to also analyze what we're doing while the speech is taking place, because you can get lost in the speech and you get sucked up into the story and you go, whoa, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be working here. And so you have to distance yourself at the same time. And I do that, and the way I do it is I'm a note taker. And so I'll write open body close. And I'll watch that. And then somewhere else on this page, I'll also identify either those things that the speaker asked me to look for, or what was in the executive summary of the manual. And I'll target 2 or 3 things. Did they use hand gestures, or what did they use vocal variety, or whatever it is I'm supposed to be looking for. But if I write open body close, and I did it today as I was trying to dissect these evaluations, that keeps me focused on the task at hand and not sitting back and enjoying the speech, because the last thing you want to do is enjoy the speech. You're working.
Right, that's a good point.
I don't completely agree.
All right. That's why there's
fair.
chocolate and vanilla.
Yeah.
Can we go around and? No, I'm just.
Your favorite
You're the one that's evaluated
Yeah.
3 times. I really appreciate you being evaluated 3 times. What was the most helpful thing that you heard as a speaker today from the evaluations?
See.
And not to compete.
Because we're not competitive.
I was going to say what was the most, but what were some of the things that you took from that?
Okay, some of the things, not the most.
Right.
And then I want to have time to just freak out like this, so.
Yeah.
do
I'm
that.
sorry, I totally agree.
It's okay. It's good. This is an open meeting, open forum.
I think from each person, I got one solid thing that I need to think about, and I need to reevaluate when I'm building my speech. Content versus intent was the first one I got. And I think most of the times I go for content as opposed to intent. What is the intention of that nugget or that story or that punchline that I'm throwing in there? What am I hoping to draw from it? What is the value of the words I'm going to use? More often than not, I gravitate towards it sounds good, it sounds intelligent, or it's funny, rather than what will the person get out of it. And Jesse's evaluation made me rethink that and realize it's not about me. It's not about making people laugh. It's not about sounding intelligent, sounding smart. It's what are you giving people to think about? What is your intention in putting in this quote or this joke or this story in this speech for it to build value and to have meaning? The second thing is reinvigorate. I do have a monotone. We have spoken with this about Jesse. I think we've beaten that horse dead, because I have this sober, constant voice that sometimes I think, you get boring after 2 minutes. First I know I have a heavy accent. And when I listen to someone with an accent, after some time I go, okay, you need to think about that, because after 2 minutes, it sounds very sing-songy, and I don't know if that makes sense. When we speak in Swahili and when we speak like most of the Kenyan dialects, it sounds like you're singing. It's like this constant song, but it's as if it just goes like this the whole time. So it's go up, go down, go up, go down. And at some point it sounds like a broken record when you don't know what the person is talking about, when you don't understand the language. And I feel like my speaking sounds like that sometimes. So the reinvigorate makes me think, okay, you need to find something that is going to re-energize your speech. Because once you give your story and now you go into the true detail of why you actually give the story or why you're giving this speech, then you need to give something else that gives life to your speech.
So, okay. So would you have one more thing real quick? Otherwise I want to get just feedback from everybody.
Last one was from Kim, where she said to add a comparison or to use your introduction to tie up your speech. Bring back that point that you made at the beginning. You used a good quote at the beginning. Tie that quote back, because then you're helping people relate the conclusion to the introduction into the body of your speech. So those are the three main things that I got out of this evaluation.
And I think if you can get one thing out of an evaluation, that's good, right? I mean, take away one thing, I think that's a good goal.
I took out a lot more, but those are the
Well,
three
you
ones
got
that
3 evaluations as well, so. Plus all of everything you're reading.
Everybody else.
Is there a takeaway from evaluations in general, Brad, that, I mean, you've been doing this a long time and there's still a lot to talk about, but is there one thing that you took away today that you might integrate into your evaluation? Want me to come back to you? No.
Good question. Yeah. I can't do it without notes. But John was saying that he wants to learn to do it without notes, and I would be, my hands would be tied without notes.
But Brad, you do such a nice job of laying the notes there and not, it doesn't seem like you stand off to the side and then every once in a while just glance over there. So
I would love to show somebody what my notes look like because they're all over the page and I write in a circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and those are my points.
Yeah.
And I will.
Let's illustrate.
Yeah. If I was going to get up and give an evaluation, I'm watching and writing at the same time, and then but no, this is the evaluation. This is what the notes I took during your speech over here.
No, but this is what you took when they gave. This is what I took when they gave.
But to me, I could do it, but I don't think I'd be nearly as effective in collecting my thoughts if I didn't have my notes.
I think that goes back to your point of wide versus deep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I was more focused.
Caroline, is there one thing, just in the evaluation part of that you'll take away when you evaluate someone? Just real quick, we have 4 minutes.
I have a
together.
conversation with them on Wednesday or Tuesday. I think that, and Jess is very good at it, she's very faithful at it. She has made me prepare for my speeches way before I would have actually prepared for them and define what I'll speak about. So yes,
Mark, sorry.
get a hold of them.
Just a couple things. A little history. The evaluations done by the camera, I think, is something that I think about if I'm evaluating. I see these, how many clicks they get. Sometimes there's one, most of the time it's 0. So that means the speaker's not going back and looking at their own video. I know it's difficult to do, but that's a pretty cruel evaluation right there. And the other thing, history-wise, I know Brad remembers this, but we used to have a lot of people request evaluators.
Yeah.
And I don't know the dynamics of that, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, and just the way it was, because somebody who had a really important speech and really wanted somebody to look at it, they would request. Not good, bad, but that was an issue back in the day, wasn't it, Brad?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and it was interesting because I think that we had first-time speakers evaluate first-time speakers. I mean, it's tough for a first-time evaluator to evaluate someone that has been here for 10 years.
Exactly. So.
Dave, did you have a takeaway? Nothing.
Great. I think you get fresh perspective.
Lots of takeaways. I've seen several different versions of how people organize their notes. Each time I've heard that, I've immediately written it down. So this is something that I want to remember and try to incorporate. I know I'm probably taking myself now, but I'm kind of excited for my next evaluation. Don't think about it. But I think the biggest takeaway is really just the organization and pulling out some of the points and things to think about as you're watching the speech and figuring out how you're going to make the evaluation.
Janelle? You're going to have to be fast.
Okay, organization, building rapport, building districts.
Like it. Chad?
I think when Caroline said that she had one good takeaway from each one, I think when I give an evaluation, what I've kind of learned is that what makes me feel like I gave a good evaluation is that they know what my takeaway was. And so normally, that's not a question I ask myself after the evaluation's over, is what did I take away from this speech? And then normally when I see the yellow card come up, that's my closing. I say, what was mine? So mine for Caroline would have been, I think the moral of her whole story is that the only person you should compare yourself to is the person you used to be. And so I think that's normally how I end now. So I think before when I always had that good job come out because I felt rushed. and I know by that time, and I was trying to pitch. And so normally, what I want to be the best part, hopefully I'll have a couple of things I'll see that I can give someone as tips that'll make the speech better, but I always want to make sure I end well, where they know what my takeaway was. And so I think that's what reminded me, hearing all that last little bit, what you had that you took away from it, that kind of reminded me of how I do my speech.
I think, performance, wide, writing some notes down, you're here for a job rather than just organizing that. Some great tips for review.
Great, Jeremy?
I agree with all those things, but for me personally, what I took away today was a greater importance of the role of the evaluator and a lot more responsibility on me personally going forward as being an evaluator. And I think with that, that allows, I feel like then I have an obligation to give that constructive criticism. So I think generally speaking, those are all the, I feel like now it's speech is important and evaluator is like 1A.
Who remembers Rich Delaney throwing the chair during an evaluation?
Yeah, I mean, multiple times it felt like.
Multiple times.
He was tough.
Somebody flipped a table at one point.
Yeah.
Used to get rowdy.
What were they evaluating?
I'd say tons of things. Probably the biggest is this empty things like the ums and ahs and the obvious things you really don't need to point out. So I think that was eye-opening for me because that's probably what I would use as a crutch.
Good. I think my takeaway is just really creating and facilitating that relationship, I think, with the speaker. And I think that if we all kind of did that, our club would be even stronger just in that relationship part, which I think is great. So thank you all so much for coming. I know we kind of talked about maybe a part 2. Yes, Craig?
Sorry, Matt, I just want to give my takeaway. Just really
Please.
quickly.
Oh, yes,
Contribute to
yes.
that as
No,
well.
that's a good point. I'm sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
all 3 of you.
No, I think it's clear from Jessie that if you want to improve your evaluation, you just have to work at it. And from everything, her process, everything she described was just how much she cares and how much she works at it. And doesn't just like show up day of and just like, I'll just kind of wing it. It's very clear that she thinks about it and takes it seriously. And I think that's probably like if you approach it that way, you will get better.
Yeah, great. What about you two? I'm sorry.
I would just say ditto onto that. I think the relationship is important and going above and beyond the obvious of what's happened during the speech and really making it better for all of us.
Jess, final quick thoughts.
I forgot to share this actual form that I used. So if anybody needs help with how to construct an evaluation, like how to start it, how to do the middle, how to do the end, just come see me. And not just today, I'll help you with that piece of it. I have this really simple form that I guess.
But this form is outstanding.
I guess I
used it.
developed
You did.
So
we've all used it.
There's an opening,
Yes,
there's
yes.
evaluating the speech, there's evaluating the speaker, and then the conclusion, which is the one thing you want the speaker to remember, which is exactly the point Chad made.
This like 20 times.
Okay.
We're just amazing.
Thank you for, thank you. Thanks to Julie for putting this together. Thanks to Caroline for a great speech. Really, thank you for being brave and stepping up. It's not easy to get critiqued for an hour and a half, but you did it well.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thought-provoking.